Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be filming another unsolved disappearance. This is a case that is not too well known, although it is quite a recent case, and it's just extremely sketchy. We don't really know what happened, and I do think it's really important to discuss this and make people aware of what happened. So cruise ships, they're actually really sketchy. I personally would never go on one. I know they're seen as like this luxury vacation, somewhere to get away. Obviously you're going through different countries and it's meant to be quite a beautiful holiday to have. But there's actually a lot of sketchy stuff that goes on, and there's been over sort of 300 disappearances on cruise ships just in the last decade, which is a lot. But of course this stuff isn't really publicised, it's not really spoken about. So unfortunately today we're going to be discussing a woman that fell into that statistic, and her name is Rebecca Coriam. So Rebecca Coriam was born in Cheshire to Mike and Anne-Marie Coriam. She was born on the 11th of March 1987 in Cheshire, and she grew up alongside her sister Rachel and her two foster brothers. Now, Rebecca was described as a really outgoing, loud, funny woman, and I think we'll be able to see that through today's story. But she was very vibrant, she had a lot about her, and she was interested in a lot of different things. So after she finished Chester Catholic University, she worked at the Chester Zoo, where her grandparents previously worked as well. It was a bit of a family tradition. And after that, she actually joined the British Army Cadets in her late teens and attended Plymouth University, where she also studied sports science. So already she's doing a lot of things at a young age. She's interested in animals, she's interested in the army cadets, so she had a lot going for her, and I think it says a lot about her personality. Now, let's talk about 2010. So, this is when Rebecca interviewed for the Disney Cruise Line Wonder, which sailed 7 days from Los Angeles to Mexico. Obviously, an extremely high demanding position. There was thousands of applicants that applied, and Rebecca actually got the interview in London where she went. So, she got the job. She was absolutely ecstatic. I know a lot of people, even in their 20s, like me, really like Disney and stuff. I personally don't. I kind of left that in my childhood, but I know a lot of people still really like Disney. So it was an amazing job for her to have. So she got the job, and she was then flown out to Florida Disneyland, so the actual Disneyland, where she completed some training. I think it was a few months, and then she came back home for a bit, said her goodbyes, packed, and that's when she set off for the 7 day cruise. Now, when Rebecca got there, she immediately made friends with a woman named Tracy Medley. Now, they got on like a house on fire, and the connection was really strong between them, and they actually ended up forming a romantic connection. So they were working on this ship together, they were very comfortable with one another, they were partying, they were drinking, they were having lots of fun. And also, I forgot to mention that Rebecca joined the cruise as a youth worker. So primarily she was there to look after the children and give support, I assume, but during her time off, when she wasn't on shift, she would of course go around the ship and party. She was a 24-year-old woman, and she'd done this a lot with Tracy Medley. Now, a few weeks into the cruise, unfortunately, Rebecca's grandfather actually died back in Cheshire, so she actually was on leave and went back to shore for 2 weeks. Now, when she came back, that was actually the last time her parents would ever see her. Now, she came back and she reunited with Tracy, but then she actually realised that there was another man in the picture. His name was Devon Hyde, and he was actually Tracy's boyfriend who worked as a bartender on the ship. So all three of them were working there, and Rebecca didn't really adjust to this well, because prior to that she'd been on the ship for 2 months with Tracy, and she actually described to Tracy that she thought she was in love with her. So it was a really strong, fiery relationship that they had. So obviously Rebecca found herself in a bit of a love triangle, if you will. And Tracy and Devon were going back to his cabin a lot. They were partying, and Rebecca took this really bad, and according to Tracy, she one night expressed that she was so upset, which was on March 17th, 2011, so a few weeks into her return. She was extremely emotional, and she actually said to Tracy that she was in love with her. Now, also, this hasn't been confirmed, but from Tracy, she said that Rebecca was even talking about suicide due to how upset she was, which, you know, it's hard to know if that is the truth or not, because Rebecca didn't have depression to her family's knowledge. She was a very happy woman, but she obviously got involved with Tracy very quickly, and the feelings were very strong. So let's fast forward to March 22nd. Now, witnesses report seeing Tracy, Devon, and Rebecca at one of the ship's bars, and they were drinking during the day and into the evening. Now, Tracy, Rebecca's lover at the time, hadn't actually spoke for 6 years about Rebecca's disappearance, and she only briefly spoke after 6 years, which is strange in itself. But anyway, so she reports that they all went back to Devon's cabin, where Rebecca actually initiated a threesome between them. She said that she started kissing Devon and then started kissing Tracy, and then things escalated and they ended up having a threesome. Now, after this, Rebecca mentioned that she wanted to leave, she wasn't feeling great, and she wanted to take a walk around the ship. And Tracy didn't want to go because it was late, so she let Rebecca go. But she asked her to leave the door ajar, so put a bolt in the door to keep it open, and then she left. Now, the last reported sighting of Rebecca is at one of the crew phones at 5:45 a.m. And on this CCTV, you can see that Rebecca is extremely emotional. She's crying and she's talking to someone on the phone. She's also wearing really baggy clothes that did not belong to her. They were a few sizes too big for her. And on the CCTV, you can see another crew member, a male, approaches her to ask if she's okay, and she replies, "Yes, I'm fine." She then takes her hands and puts her hair behind her and puts her hands in her back pocket and walks off. So, as I said, this was the last reported sighting of Rebecca. So 9 a.m. rolled around that morning, and Rebecca was due for her shift as a youth worker, and she didn't turn up. So the Disney staff were naturally a bit worried, so they decided to page her on the ship's telecommunications and see where she was, and ask her to come to her shift, and also say that she was potentially missing. At this stage, obviously, they may have assumed she was just morning off, or she was not feeling well, or she overslept. So then some of the staff went and searched her cabin, but there was nothing there. Rebecca wasn't there, and there was nothing to suggest that she had been there. So this is when Disney had to call the Coriam parents and tell them that their daughter is missing. Parents flew out immediately to LA, which is where the ship was, and they immediately wanted to find out what had happened. Now, the investigation into Rebecca's disappearance was absolutely appalling. It's literally as though they did not care. Disney did not care. So the thing is with cruise ships is that because they're essentially a floating hotel, it's hard to know which jurisdiction the boat is in when a crime is committed, because they're flowing through different waters and different countries. So it's very difficult to sort of get someone on the case quickly, because you have to determine where the ship is. But this actually fell into the US Coast Guard and the Mexican Navy, so it was their job to look into this, and they actually searched the waters and kind of backtracked from where the Disney cruise had came from. But shockingly, the ship did not turn around or even stop. And if something like this happened, surely that is extremely worrying, and you would stop the ship and you would look. It doesn't matter that there's loads of passengers on there to enjoy their holiday. A young woman is missing at sea, so really there's no excuse. They should have stopped the ship and searched. So what happened is a detective from the Bahamas actually came, because it was kind of in that jurisdiction, and he flew in 3 days after Rebecca went missing. So again, it's just ridiculous. He should have been there straight away, but he waited 3 days, and then he searched the ship for 1 day. Now, this should have been a thorough investigation, but he assures that he had searched this ship one day, and he also only spoke to a few staff members when there were over 3,000 passengers on board and 500 to 1,000 staff. So he just did not really get on this, and he did not take this seriously, which is an absolute joke. And then when Rebecca's parents arrived, they were actually brought in a blacked out car, and they were brought to the back exit of the boat, so away from all the passengers, who were then getting off for the next batch of people to come back on. So the whole thing is just crazy. Rebecca's parents felt like they were really trying to keep it on the hush hush, and that comes down to the whole case that I'm covering today, the fact that, do Disney know what happened? So just to clarify, what they basically said was, let's just keep this on the down low, and they continued with the second round trip. So they literally dropped everyone off back to LA, all the passengers, and then they got ready for the next crew of people to go on and travel the cruise back to Mexico. So then when the parents arrived, the captain actually spoke to them, and he basically gave his opinion and his condolences, because he said that he was pretty sure that Rebecca had committed suicide and jumped overboard basically. And he didn't want to entertain any other scenario. He was just saying, like, she jumped off, she must have been suicidal, I'm sorry for your loss, it's tragic, but what can we do? But there's literally nothing to suggest that Rebecca would do this. Although she was distraught at the time that she went missing, it doesn't necessarily mean that she killed herself. As I said, she didn't have any issues. Her family said she didn't have any issues with depression or anything, so it just doesn't really make sense that she would kill herself over a fling, over someone that she's known for a few months. Another reason why the captain agreed this was because they actually found a pink flip-flop on deck 5. Now, deck 5 was the crew's pool, so it was just a little hangout for the crew, and everyone kind of just started saying that she jumped from deck 5. We don't really know why. Again, it's just a bit sketchy how all the staff are all saying that the same thing, that she jumped off deck 5. He also theorised that there may have been a rogue wave at that night, and that's why Rebecca fell in. So they're basically saying that she was upset about the phone call, so she went up to deck 5 to get some air to clear her head, and a rogue wave hit and took her overboard. Now, rogue waves are literally insane. They are so big, they are so loud, they are literally like 100 feet tall. So it's a bit strange that Rebecca would fall overboard and no one else would hear or see it, and no one would see the fact that there were rogue waves. So this theory is not really relevant, because people actually reported the waters being really clear that night, and at least one other person would have heard if there was a rogue wave that took someone overboard. Now, months and months went on, and there was nothing came up from Rebecca's disappearance. Her parents didn't even receive a full investigation to their daughter's disappearance, and everyone just basically tried to say that she killed herself, and that was it. Now, a few months went by, and the bank actually sent the Coriam family some interesting information. Rebecca's credit card had been used, and they were unable to give the location or any details, but this really gave the Coriam family some hope, because they thought maybe she was still out there somewhere and that she was alive. Also, they tried to get onto her Facebook, and when they did, it said that her password had been changed recently. So again, they were really hopeful that maybe she was alive and she just wasn't coming home for some reason. Now, again, another woman actually emailed the family and said that she was 85% sure that she saw Rebecca in Venice with a dark-haired man, but again, nothing came from this. So going back to the Disney Cruise Wonder, there was literally CCTV everywhere. There were thousands of cameras, so it's really odd that Disney didn't pick up on CCTV Rebecca jumping overboard or falling overboard. So there's been no CCTV released of this, and a lot of people have speculated that it's just Disney keeping it on the down low basically. Now, in October 2011, so a few months after Rebecca disappeared, a journalist called John Ronson actually took it upon himself to join the ship and investigate Rebecca's case. He became fascinated by it because it was just so bizarre that there were no answers to what had happened to her. So he booked himself a 7-day cruise through the same line that Rebecca went through. Now, he spoke to multiple employees on that ship who were actually working there the time that Rebecca was, and they all seemed to act so shady, and they all just gave the same response: she jumped from deck 5. She committed suicide. Every single one of them said the same thing, and there were even a few that were saying, I can't talk about this, Disney won't let us talk about this. So it's just so sketchy that everyone came to this conclusion. Now, back to the flip-flop. So there was a flip-flop recovered, and all the staff speculated that this was Rebecca's and she's jumped from deck 5, but her family and friends confirmed that this was nothing like Rebecca would wear. She wasn't into pink, she wasn't into flowers, and they weren't even her size. So this was not Rebecca's flip-flop, and astonishingly, in that amazing investigation they did, on one of the flip-flops, it actually had another crew member's name on them, meaning they belonged to them. So this was quickly ruled out as well. Also, deck 5 proved way too high for someone to just fall over, and Rebecca's parents also came to this conclusion when they boarded the ship. It was a cruise ship, so obviously the walls aren't going to be low because there's children, there's people, there's vulnerable people on the ship. So the pool on deck 5, the deck was just no way going to be low enough for someone to jump over. So it's all extremely odd. Now, obviously, it's been 9 years and a bit, and there's nothing that's come from her case. Disney have continued to go on, and obviously they have barely spoken about this. So let's get into some theories now. So theory 1 is that she committed suicide. Now, obviously, this could have been the case, but this doesn't really make sense because upon searching Rebecca's cabin, they actually found some tickets that were addressed to her parents and that she was going to give to them to join her in the coming months. So it just doesn't really suggest that she was suicidal if she was planning on doing this, but you never know. Secondly, she could have been murdered. Now, she may have been murdered because on the night that she disappeared, of course, she had this threesome, and the clothes that she was wearing were most likely Devon's. So we don't know if there was any foul play involved because of this, but that is the second theory. And the third theory is that she was a victim of human trafficking, which again may seem unlikely, but you never know. And as I mentioned, cruise ships are notorious for crimes because it's a lot harder to catch someone when someone's murdered on a cruise ship, just due to the fact that you're literally floating in the middle of the sea and there's no police involved really until they figure out whose jurisdiction it's in. So that's all the information on this case. It's obviously extremely heartbreaking. She was just a 24-year-old woman and she had the job of a lifetime, some would say, and Disney just didn't protect her. They obviously are hiding something. There's got to be some evidence of what happened to her. I just don't understand how there's no CCTV of her after that point when there's cameras literally everywhere. So take what you will from that, but that's the end of the case. And thank you so much for watching. If you do like these videos, please let me know by leaving a comment or a like or subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much.